Welcome to Module 1 lecture. In this lecture, we will discuss the what and why of positive psychology. First, we will review the historical background of how the positive psychology movement emerged. Then, we'll learn about what is often misunderstood as positive psychology, and then provide various definitions of positive psychology to differentiate between what is and what is not positive psychology. We'll take a brief look at where positive psychology stands today. And finally, talk about the pillars of positive psychology as related to the topics we will cover in this course. Let's start with taking a look at this article. This article features 10 psychological studies that represent what psychology as usual has revealed about the human nature. I use the term psychology as usual here to refer to traditional psychology as opposed to positive psychology. If you scroll down the article, you may notice that some of these studies are familiar to you, such as the Stanford Prison Experiment and the Marshmallow Study, which you might have heard from your general psychology course. Let's take a moment to review what these studies seem to say about us. So what have you noticed? It may be striking to you that the majority of these studies say something pretty negative about us. That we're mean, inattentive, and impatient. That we're susceptible to power and stereotypes. Only 2 of the 10 studies portray a positive side of the human nature. Like this, psychology as usual has viewed the human nature as largely flawed and fragile than positive. Just think about the topics you typically learn in your psychology courses. We learn about abnormal psychology rather than normal psychology. In cognitive psychology, we learn about the illusions of human memory and cognitive biases and errors we make. And in social psychology, we learn that we unfortunately hold a lot of prejudice which influences our social behaviors. So why is this case? There seem to be several reasons why there might be this negative focus in psychology as usual. First of all, the negative is often perceived as more real than the positive. It seems to be consistent with Sigmund Freud's view of human nature. Freud believed that human behavior is motivated by self-serving drives. For example, let's say that you're helping your roommate with a difficult homework. Most people would view this as a positive behavior. However, Freud would say that you're actually just trying to express the need to dominate and feel superior to your roommate. The second reason can be attributed to the power of the negative. Generally, the bad appears to be stronger than the good in major life events, relationships, and emotions we experience. The negative somehow seem to catch our attention more easily than the positive, perhaps because they're actually less common and have an adaptive survival value. Finally, this negative focus have become more prominent since World War II. Prior to World War II, psychology actually had a more balanced agenda, which were to cure mental illness, make normal people's lives productive and fulfilling, and study geniuses. However, due to the need to attend to psychologically impacted veterans after the war, the research funding in psychology were mostly focused on the first agenda, which was to cure the mental illness. This resulted in psychology adopting a disease model focused on the deficits of the human functioning and forgetting about the other 2 agendas of psychology. Recognizing this imbalance in psychology as usual, Martin Seligman, who was a former president of the American Psychological Association, started the positive psychology movement in 1998. In his APA presidential address, he said that the positive psychology movement is to catalyze a change in focus of psychology from preoccupation only with the repairing the worst things in life to also building positive qualities. So the positive psychology movement was not to deny that we are susceptible and fragile beings, but to say that we are something more than that. If you're interested in learning more about Seligman's view on the need of positive psychology, watch this TED Talk through the link provided in Module 1, and also read the signed article by Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi. So what is positive psychology? There seems to be some common myths about positive psychology that has not done its justice to positive psychology. Positive psychology is often thought of as a mere happyology. This myth seems to have often misled by its name, positive psychology, but it is important to know that positive psychology is not just about simple pleasure. It entails the various forms of well being and the good of human characteristics. Also, positive psychology is often thought of as a prescription to a happy life. However, the goal of positive psychology is not to prescribe a happy life, but to describe and explain what makes a happy life in an empirical manner. Finally, positive psychology is not the same as self help. Some topics may be actually similar, but the biggest difference is that self help is not grounded on science, and positive psychology is. So, what is really positive psychology? Positive psychology is defined as the scientific study of optimal human functioning. This definition was first introduced by some of the early leading positive psychology researchers in 1999 at the Positive Psychology Manifesto. So, is this anything new? Not really. Humanistic psychologists like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow in the 1960s have already emphasized the positive sides of human nature as a reaction to Freud and the behaviorists. In fact, Maslow was the first person to use the term positive psychology. Take a moment to read this excerpt from one of his books, Motivation and Personality. Isn't it striking how similar this is to what Seligman said in his presidential address? So, positive psychology actually seems to be not a revolution, but just a matter of refocus. Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi say that the message is to remind our field that psychology is not just the study of pathology, weakness, and damage. It is also the study of strength and virtue. And treatment is not just fixing what is broken, it is nurturing what is best. Lindley and colleagues say that positive psychology has always been with us. It is passed unrecognized and uncelebrated, and what positive psychology movement achieved is lifted up, celebrated, what we do know about what makes life worth living. Furthermore, Sheldon and King says that positive psychology is actually nothing more than just the scientific study of ordinary human strengths and virtues. Positive psychology can be understood as a general perspective on the discipline of psychology and a collection of research topics focused on positive aspects of human behavior rather than a subfield of psychology. As Sheldon and King puts it, it is simply psychology that focuses on what works, what is right, and what is improving. So, where does positive psychology stand today? Since the positive psychological movement, a plethora of associations, educational programs, and journals dedicated to positive psychology has exploded within the past 2 decades. We're in a very exciting stage where positive psychology is blooming, but yet there is a lot more to explore. So, in this course, we will focus on the 3 pillars of positive psychology. The first pillar is the positive subjective experiences, which we will learn about positive emotional experiences, flow, and experience of meaning. We will also talk about positive individual characteristics, which will be covered by character strengths and also include resilience and values. Finally, we will also learn about how positive psychology is embedded in positive institutions such as schools, clinical settings, workplaces. These positive institutions facilitate the development of positive individual characteristics, which in turn facilitate positive subjective experiences.